Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back with another client interview for you guys today. And I'm excited to have James on with us today. James is one of our students that just finished going through the summer 2025 internship recruiting process. It's one of the earlier students to finish the process, actually, and ended up getting a very good outcome. And so I just want to get him come on here, talk about his journey, how he was able to get the outcome that he got, and hopefully, we'll share some insights along the way in terms of what worked for him. That'll also be able to help you guys out as well. And so, James, first of all, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And if you don't mind, just kind of kick things off for us by introducing yourself a little bit, tell us who you are, and then we'll dive into some questions for you.
Totally, yeah. Thanks, Sam. So yeah, I'm a student at a non-Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Ivy, and I recently accepted an offer at Morgan Stanley to join their 2025 investment banking summer analyst program in New York. And so I've been super busy with recruiting recently, and went through kind of the whole Wall Street Mastermind program. It was a great experience, and yeah, just happy to be here and happy to answer whatever questions you have.
That's awesome, man. Obviously, Morgan Stanley is a great firm. I'm a little bit biased, but what did it feel like when you finally got the offer? And this was the first offer, right? I mean, it was pretty early. So,
Yeah.
what did that feel like when you got the call?
Yeah, so I had done one super day at that point, and then I had another super day the day after I ended up getting the offer. So I was kind of in like kind of a weird spot, I guess you could say. And then I had so the super day for Morgan Stanley was virtual. So I went to my school's library, just did the kind of the Zoom super day. It was back-to-back interviews with a bunch of kind of MDs and VPs. And they literally called me an hour after. So I was sitting in my bed, just doing nothing. That I kind of, the phone started ringing. It was like a random number, but it said Morgan Stanley under it. And at that point, you kind of know you're gonna get the job, right? They're not gonna call you and reject you. And so I was just like super happy. I, texted my parents and just I don't know. It was a great feeling, and I don't know. Yeah, I thought that like I think a lot of people feel like, especially in kind of this industry where it's so kind of talked about, and there's a lot of stuff kind of on just kind of on the whole process in general, that people feel like they're going to be a new person when they get the offer, and their whole life's going to change. And to be honest, it felt great, but I'm still, didn't really feel like my whole life changing kind of experience. I'm still just kind of, went hung out with my friends and kept on living my life, but I'm definitely excited at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's good to stay grounded, right? And I think, yeah, a lot of people get so wrapped up in terms of like they let their job become their entire
Totally.
identity, and
Totally.
you're so much more than just your job, right? I mean, like it is a part of your identity, but
Yeah.
it shouldn't change who you are. Or if it does, then I think I don't know, then maybe you need to kind of re-examine yourself a little bit. But
And
but
and and that's one of the things that actually drew me to Morgan Stanley. I was during the Super Day, I literally had this exact same conversation with a VP. He was talking about how he likes, MS because the people there were obviously super focused on their jobs, super, results oriented, but at the same time, make sure to take time for their families, make sure to, just be a regular person. And I think it kind of gets lost in finance. So it's really important to kind of keep that. Yeah.
for sure. What did your parents say when you called them?
they they were extremely happy, but the whole recruiting process, they were, their parents obviously, so they're very they didn't really understand like the difficulty of getting a job. They're like, oh, you'll get it, it'll be easy, it'll be fine. Like they kind of have that perspective, and so they were really happy. They weren't super shocked because I think my parents aren't in finance at all, so they didn't really get like kind of, how much I'd been working for it. So it was kind of funny because, but yeah, no, they're really excited. So it was a good feeling for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like that happens a lot. And look, as parents, I have two kids, but as parents, we also tend to be the people that have the most belief in our own children, right? And so, like, to them, you're like, you're probably like the smartest kid out there. You go to a great school, you've done well your whole life. They're like, yeah, you got this. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not a surprising reaction. So let's go back to like the beginning of your kind of recruiting journey. I don't know when it officially started, but like had you, because you started working with us, I want to say it was like what, beginning of sophomore year, right? It was like September. It was like early September.
September-ish. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, was that when you first started kind of preparing for recruiting, or did you already know as a freshman that you wanted to do banking and you had already kind of started making moves? Like, what were some of the things that you were doing prior to Wall Street Mastermind, if
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah, so I'm the type of guy who's known kind of what he wants to do for a while. I've known I wanted to do banking probably since senior year of high school, maybe even before then. And that's not to say that I was grinding technicals in high school at all, but it's kind of just something that's always been on my mind. And I definitely took the time to, research what makes firms different and kind of what the industry actually is and kind of having that base knowledge kind of before recruiting happened. But at the same time, I didn't, fully get into it until college and sophomore year.
Yeah.
And so, I joined, finance clubs and made sure to do kind of related experience before joining Wall Street Mastermind. But I wanted to join because I knew that the recruiting process is, it was, something that's kind of structured and very kind of there's a way to go about it. And I wanted to make sure that I went about it the right way. And so, I decided to go with Wall Street Mastermind and go through the program. And yeah, I mean, I can totally, go deeper, answer any questions you have. But that's kind of the timeline that I had.
Gotcha. Okay. So, by the way, like, how did you even know what investment banking was in high school? Or how did you even like start looking into it? Because I think back to,
Yeah.
there's just a lot more information nowadays, I'm sure. I'm kind of old, but if I think back to when I was in high school, like I had no idea what investment banking
Yeah.
was, and I was not thinking about like my career or whatever. Back then, I was probably just thinking about, oh, I got into college and I want to enjoy the last year of my high school or whatever, right? So like, how did you even kind of decide on that so early?
Yeah, I mean, so I took an economics course in high school because I was always a numbers guy. I loved kind of applying numbers to kind of real world thinking, and I thought economics did a really good job of that. And so I took an econ course. We also talked a lot about stock trading in the course. So I started trading stocks, and I'm sure you remember the whole GameStop saga, right? Everybody, all this retail interest in the stock market, and I was kind of right there with everybody, and kind of had that experience and realized that I really loved finance, but I didn't want to be an investor. I kind of, you know, I really, really wanted to learn more about companies, and I loved kind of learning about industries, learning about, the problems that are being solved in the world. And I thought that kind of after doing research into the different facets of finance, and after knowing that I didn't want a buy side role, I settled on investment banking as kind of the best kind of area to be to get that, learning experience and get to kind of know all these different types of companies, all these different industries, front and center, right? You're going to be in investment banking on calls with CFOs or, doing deals with companies that you can really learn a lot about. So that's kind of what drew me to the industry. And as for how I kind of learned about it, I went to a high school in a big city where a lot of people, a lot of my friends' parents were in the industry or, people, classmates. And so that's kind of how it got on my radar in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So do you make a lot of money from meme stocks?
No, yeah. So I wasn't. So the whole meme stock thing, I like totally was not into that. I'd always been like a kind of long term, like blue chip kind of guy, and
Okay.
so I was investing like a couple years before the GameStop thing, and when it hit, I thought it was totally stupid, and I that thinking was probably detrimental. I mean, I probably would have made a lot of money if I didn't have such a kind of miserly attitude towards it, but
If you were such
uh,
an old soul with a
yeah.
mature perspective.
I wish I YOLO'd into
I
into.
have a friend that made seven figures on GameStop. Um, but I mean, obviously he's like my age. He
Yeah.
makes a lot of money in his during his day. He's like a engineering manager at a very big tech company. So those guys make a lot, and
Yeah.
he invests on the side, and he's just like kind of a degen. So yeah,
That's
he just wouldn't stop telling me about it. I was like, all right, man, that's great.
Did
um,
you end up getting on it or no?
no, I never got in on it. So
Yeah.
the same as you, probably. Maybe I should have, but I don't know. Not really my style. So going back to most rounds, I said like, okay, you talked about like wanting to
Yeah.
join because you knew recruiting was structured and you want to make sure that you kind of went about it the right way.
Yeah.
Was that um did you have to like have a conversation with your parents about joining, and like if so, like were they what was their reaction? Because you mentioned this earlier, it's like they had a lot of faith in you. They probably thought like they don't
Mm.
understand how hard it is. I'm sure they thought like you could just do this on your own. So like ultimately, obviously you still joined. Like were they supportive of you joining a program like this? Or like was that a difficult conversation, or how did that
Yeah,
work?
no, they were pretty supportive, thankfully. I'm happy. I have like very supportive parents and they kind of are really, they're not like, oh, you need to make the most money, but at the same time, like they want me to do well in like kind of whatever I enjoy. So if I told them I want to go, dig for bones in Tanzania, they would have, been super supportive of that too, which I'm really happy about. And so when I kind of told them that I wanted to be an investment banker and that I thought that this program would be kind of just, putting my best foot forward, I think that, they were really supportive, which I'm, really happy about. And it wasn't too much of a conversation. I mean, yeah.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, it's always great when parents are super supportive. I also find that like a lot of the, because I mean we have a lot of students that want to work with us, and some parents are supportive and some parents are not. And
Yeah.
also like a lot of it comes down to like the parent-child relationship and how it's been over the past 18 years, and do
Yeah.
they trust their kid's judgment, right? Like when their kid comes to them and says, "Hey, I found this program that I think is really gonna help me." Some parents are like, "Okay, great, it's gonna help you." Like we're supportive. And some parents are like, what are you talking about? Like,
Right.
are you being an idiot? Right? And it's just like the way they react, a lot of it is actually just goes back to like how much trust there is, right? And so it's always great to hear when parents are supportive of kind of what their kids want to pursue. Obviously,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, all parents want their kids to do well, right? Like that's universal, right?
Yeah.
Um, I guess what what did you, so then you joined Wall Street Mastermind, right?
Yeah.
And that was beginning of sophomore year.
Yeah.
Um, what did you do once you joined them? Like, what were some of the things that you worked on with us? And just kind of walk us through your entire process of preparing. Because obviously, you probably had, most of your first semester, sophomore year to do whatever preparation you needed to. And then basically, applications started opening up towards the end of that first semester. And then after that, it was just like go, go, go. And it was kind of a whirlwind, right? So, kind of walk us through that process of like, what are some of the things that you think move the needle for you the most, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the recruiting process is thankfully something that's not super clouded in mystery, right? I mean, if you want to learn how to do it, you can use resources and find out how, whether that's through, upperclassmen or online, whatever it is. But I think that at least for me, I'm somebody who like really needs like so just okay, yeah. I'll start over. I'm somebody who kind of like if I know what I want to do, right? Like
Mhm.
even if that's the case, I still might need kind of a little bit of prodding and kind of somebody to make sure that I'm on track, right? I think that especially when you're in college and you're rushing a frat or you're taking hard classes or whatever it is, right? Like there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you get caught up in, and you might be like, I'm on this investment banking track. I'm on this investment banking track. And then, something happens and you kind of don't touch it for a while and you kind of forget about it. It's like going to the gym, right? You go to the gym a bunch and then you get sick for 2 weeks and then you don't, you're like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Keep putting it off. And I think, investment banking recruiting is one of these things that you can't really put off, right? It's a structured timeline. Things happen. You need to make sure that you're like doing all the work that you need to do. And I think that having somebody make sure that you're doing it is super important. So that's kind of what I wanted from the process from the program going in, and I definitely got that. I think there's like a tracker that for you guys watching, there's like a tracker that like keeps you updated on your progress and like basically makes you feel bad if you haven't really made any progress. So I actually thought that was super helpful because I'd look at it and I'd be like, what am I doing? Like I need to focus up. And then kind of having scheduled like weekly meetings with somebody who did like a mock interview with me or something of that nature, I thought was really helpful just to kind of keep me on track and keep me in the mindset. Um, and I think that's kind of what it boils down to, right? Everyone knows, oh, I have to learn these technicals or I have to network or I have to, do whatever. But so many things, especially as a sophomore in college, just come up that can derail you. And I think it's super important to have somebody like keeping you like in check through the whole process.
Gotcha. So like that accountability piece was really big for you,
Yeah. The
basically.
accountability. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's a great point. Like, I mean, the program has evolved so much over
Yeah.
time. We've been doing this for 6 years, almost
Yeah.
1,300 students have gone through the program now, and we just keep learning over time through a lot of trial and error and refinement in terms of like what works well, what doesn't work well. Ultimately, we're constantly trying to like improve our programs to make sure that our clients get even better results or just like get the best results possible. And we're trying to, our job is to like maximize your chances of getting an offer, and not only that, like not just any offer, but like the best offer possible, right? Like I think
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
everyone has a floor and a ceiling based on whatever their profile is. If you go to target school versus non-target school, it's going to be different. If you're a good GPA, bad GPA, it's going to be different. Like everyone has their own kind of like range of reasonable outcome. And
Totally.
our job is to like kind of raise your floor and ceiling
Yeah.
where maybe your new floor was your old ceiling. And also like within that range, how do we get you as close to your ceiling as possible? Right. And so like we just learned over time that like accountability was one of the biggest things because
Totally.
like you said, I think the gym analogy is such a good analogy because it's like one of those things where you know it's like it's good for you, you should
Yeah,
do it,
yeah,
but it's not like the most fun thing. In fact, it's not fun at all.
yeah.
And you know, the natural human tendency is just like, ah, okay, fine, I'll do it later. Okay, fine, I'll do it later. But like, let me go
It's like
down.
you need to go, the exercises you need to do. It's just like, and that motivation can be really easy for a month, and then you get lazy, and it's like you have to be consistent for for like 6 months or something like that. And so it's harder than it sounds, right? It's easier said than done. And I this is something that I've seen. I have a lot of friends who are going through recruiting, a lot of people who kind of want to be bankers, and while some of them have been successful, some of them I've talked to, and they clearly like they're just not at that place where they're ready to go into a super day or ready to go into, a technical interview.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like, dude, like, you know, you're a really smart guy. Like, you want this. Like, what's the issue? And then, all of a sudden, they have stuff going on. Things have happened, and I think having kind of like a no excuses mentality where someone's pushing you and someone's being like, you have to do this. Like, since September, you have to study your technicals, you have to network, you have to do this. If you want the job, you're like, this is simply what you're gonna have to do. No excuses. And I think like that's kind of like that's what has to be done, and that's like what makes you best positioned to get an offer.
yeah, there's a million different things trying to like pull you away from the things you need to do, right? Like really like our attention span is so short nowadays because
Yeah.
there's all these things, social media, you can scroll in TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and just like yeah, if you can't stay on track, like and with how early the recruiting process is happening, they make it early and early every year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And which means you have less and less time to prepare.
Yeah.
And you have less time to build up your resume. You have less time to network with the bankers. You have less time to,
Yeah.
prep for interviews. You have less time to check all the boxes. And so like doing all that on top of being a full-time student, on top of trying to get good grades in school, on top of
Yeah.
like participating in extracurriculars and doing internships and all these things, just like it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. Recruiting is like a full-time job in and of itself, right? Would you agree with that? Uh,
I would say, honestly, I would say it depends. I think if you are the type of person who, let's say recruiting is going to start in, you know, you're going to get interviews and offers in February, March, right? If you go and you start in late December, it's going to be a full-time job, and you're going to be, doing so much work to get to that level. But if you can start, September earlier and spread it out, you can make it a little bit, I mean, it's not saying it's easier, but you can make it a little bit less of a burden on you. I think that's another thing that the program really helped me do is like, it's because I joined at the right time. And I think, joining in the beginning of your sophomore year is, or at least getting, started with recruiting in the beginning of your sophomore year, like you can spread out all this work that you have to do over 5 months, which makes it much, much more palatable than doing it in 6 weeks.
You're right, because the amount of work is relatively fixed,
Yeah,
but how much
exactly.
time you have to do it over can make a big difference in terms of
Yeah,
how hard you have to push yourself. So I think that's a great point. And we've seen that time and time again too. Like we look at the data in terms of all the students that we work with, and there is a direct correlation between how early someone joins and
really
how good of an offer they're
interesting.
able to get on average,
Yeah,
right?
I'm
Like
not surprised. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not rocket science. Like we're teaching everyone the exact same things. The only difference is, and the work that they have to do is relatively similar. It's just like this guy had more time to do it. This guy had more time to build up his resume. He was able to do more internships. He was able to
Yeah.
network with more bankers, and he was able to practice interview answers more. So like he did better, right? And so,
Yeah. Exactly.
and also the other thing with the recruiting process too is like typically we find that the best banks typically finish recruiting the earliest. Like
Mm,
not 100% of the time, but like directionally speaking, like you'll find like the elite boutiques and a lot of like the top bulge bracket banks, like the Morgan Stanleys, they finish recruiting. They're like one of the first firms to give out offers, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the longer it takes you to get the offer, or like the later on in the recruiting timeline, it becomes then like the fewer good options are left, and you have to go further and further downstream. And so that also affects like how good of outcome you can get,
True,
right?
true. Yeah. Yeah. I think Morgan Stanley was either the first or the second bank to give offers, at least for my school. So
Yeah.
yeah, totally. And when I was networking at the beginning, I literally had bankers tell me that I was the first person to reach out to them this season, which is like, that's obviously going to help you and be good. And so I think it was just, it's important, yeah, to get ahead of it.
For sure. What do you feel like is like one or two things that you learned in this program that maybe you didn't know before the program or just something that like really made a big difference for you that where you're like, hey, I'm really glad that this is one of the reasons why I'm really glad that I did this. Like, is there anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a lot about the accountability part of it, right? I'm really glad that, I was held accountable for the work that I had to do and made sure that, I was on track for things. I also think that Wall Street Mastermind does a good job of making sure you're a little bit over prepared. I think, you know, especially with the mock interviews that I had, and kind of the work that I did, especially maybe not for the very technical boutiques. I know some of those guys can be super, super technical, but at least for the bulge brackets and for kind of the standard industry kind of interviews that you're going to get. I mean, the technicals that I got in my super day were like nothing compared to the mocks that I had and the practice that I did. I mean, seriously. And so I think a lot of banking, people in recruiting like to say, oh yeah, just like do the 400 questions. I think that that's good for memorizing things and getting like you'll be able to answer, what happens when $10 of depreciation goes up on the three financial statements, right? But when they ask you these kind of more conceptual questions or questions that like you actually need to have a genuine understanding of what you're talking about, that comes up a lot in like enterprise value questions or, things of that nature. And I think like it's very easy to tell from a banker's perspective, especially now that I've gone through the process and I've talked to other people and kind of, have these conversations. It's very, very easy, like very easy to tell when someone genuinely knows what they're talking about, or if they like looked at a guide and just like memorized like possible questions. I think that that's kind of what I got. That's something that I honestly didn't realize that I was getting until after kind of I got the offer and it was, talking to other people who kind of just went with the guide approach. It's like you need to genuinely understand what you're talking about, and you will come off so much smarter and just like so much more knowledgeable in interviews. And it really like it shows. It shows.
I think that's a really good point, which is because yeah, you're right. Like, most people nowadays when they think about how they prepare for the interviews, the first thing they'll usually do is like go ask an upperclassman, like, hey,
Yeah.
what should I do? How should
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do? And the upperclassman will typically say, oh, just read the 400 questions guide because
Yeah.
the guy that like everybody reads, right? Or read the Wall Street Oasis guide or read the Wall Street Prep Rebel. There's only like 2 or 3 guides that everybody reads, right?
Right.
And those guys are great, by the way. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think that just people kind of misunderstand how they should be used. I guess I'll put it that way.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is
Totally.
people think that, oh, okay, now I have this guy with the 400 questions and answers, so let me just go and memorize answers to these questions, like you said. And the problem is like, I think 10, 15 years ago, 15 years ago when I was recruiting, if you just did that and only that, you were
Mhm.
like ahead of the curve. Because back
Really?
then, guys were relatively new. Not
Yeah.
everyone was reading them yet. It wasn't like super prevalent, right?
Mhm.
Um, People used to read the Vault Guide, if you even know what that is. And
The
so,
vault. I've heard of it. Yeah.
yeah, so like the Vault Guide were like these super basic guides that were
Mm.
like very surface level compared to the guides that people read now.
Right.
And so most people are reading these really basic guides, think of them like elementary school level stuff. And
Yeah.
then if you're reading the guides that people are reading today, you were ahead of the competition, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward 15 years, now every single person that's trying to get in banking is reading these
Sure.
guides.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your interviewers that are now in banking read these guides. They know exactly what's in these guides, and they know that everyone else is just memorizing these guides. So when you go into these interviews, the only thing you can guarantee is that your interviewers are not going to just ask you the questions that are straight out of these guides.
Mm.
At least not
Yeah.
like you might get like 1 question or 2 questions that you've seen before, but like most of the time they're going to try to change it up, or they're going to like
Yeah.
change the variable or reword it so that they dress it up so that it sounds different. But the point is like they're trying to distinguish between the students who really know their stuff versus the students who just committed this to memory by brute force, because that
Right.
doesn't
And
right.
I think also like a lot of people told me, before recruiting that like technicals are kind of just a baseline, right? Like you don't have to stand out. You just don't have to be bad. And I disagree a little bit with that. I think you should stand out. And I think you should like, that's going to be a huge part of your super day, right? Why would you not want to stand out in that? And I think like having the mentality of, oh, everyone's just going to answer these questions the same is a bad mentality to have. And I think that even if they did ask you, 10 questions straight from the guide, if you have a genuine understanding of like why these answers are right and like where these like fundamentals come from, like it will be clear to the interviewer that you know that, and you will be able to talk more about them instead of just, giving your answer, next question, giving your answer, next question. And then that will elevate you so high, like compared to the other kids who, most people at a given super day are going to get like 90+% of the technicals right? If they know like what they're talking about. I mean, just to make it to the super day, you have to go through different rounds, and they kind of make sure you know your stuff. And so again, like you should try to stand out in the technicals part of your interview. And that really comes from having a genuine understanding of how things work instead of just kind of like memorizing the guide, which I think, Walsh Mastermind does a good job of teaching.
Yeah, and we always tell last thing on this is like we always tell people the real test for whether you're ready or not is
Yeah,
can you turn around and teach or explain these concepts
totally. Totally.
to someone who is a total newbie to finance, your younger brother, whoever, your parents who don't work in finance. Like, can you explain this concept to them in a simple layman's terms in a way that they can understand it? Because if you could do that, that's how you know you truly understand it. And at that point, it won't really matter what questions they ask you when it comes to this topic because you understand it inside out, right? Most people, when
Totally.
they're just memorizing answers, they can't turn around and teach it to someone else. They can't explain
Right.
why it's the way it is. They're just saying some words,
Right.
right?
You want to be in a point where you don't like you, it's kind of irrelevant what specific questions they ask you. Like, you're going to be prepared for,
Because
basically
you
everything.
can't ever guess or fully predict the questions that are coming your way, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I think that's really helpful. I think the other point that you brought that you just kind of reminded me of is you mentioned how like you're right, it is hard to um, I agree. You can kind of still stand out on the technical side, but relatively speaking, it is harder
Yeah.
because most of these questions have a right answer and wrong answer. And like, if you go to a super day, there are probably also a bunch of other kids who also go to Ivy League schools at these super days, and everybody's prepped up, everybody knows the answers. And so like, look, a DCF is a DCF is a DCF, right? Like no one's gonna have like some mind-blowing DCF answer that's so different from everyone
Yeah.
else's. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
like the other part of the interview where you have more of an opportunity to stand out is on the behavioral side, right?
True.
Because you have your own unique stories, which is different from everyone else's stories. And that's where I feel like, look, if everyone's similarly on par on their technicals,
Yeah.
then the tiebreaker kind of comes down to who has the best story or who's the most likable, right? Who do they want to spend 80 to 100 hours a week in the office with the most, right? And
Yeah.
so talk a little bit about the behavioral side of things, which also, by the way, the behavioral, your stories also have a big impact on your networking efforts as well, right? Like even getting the interviews in the first place and having those networking conversations and being likable
Yeah.
and having a good story, that a lot of times affects whether you actually get the referral or not. So like
Yeah.
talk about your prep on that side of things as well and like kind of how did you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think prep and behaviorals, it's fairly straightforward. I think, the kind of questions that they're going to ask, right? Tell me about a time when XYZ happened, right? Why do you want to work in banking? Why do you want to work at this firm? Which, funnily enough, I did not get those questions in my super day. I didn't even get why banking. I didn't even get why Morgan Stanley. So, I mean, I obviously had answers prepared for those, but I mean, so yeah, tell me about yourself, and then they kind of have some banks like have weird questions. I think Goldman Sachs asks like, tell me about a time where you had to make a choice between two decisions and you got the worst of the two, like, and so like some of these are kind of like random and very kind of a lot of them are predictable, but some of them aren't. I think what I did is just have a bunch of stories that I could tell that I thought were interesting and I thought, kind of were relatable or kind of, yeah, I just kind of interesting that I could talk about, that would kind of be broad enough to relate to, all these different categories. So like, time when you face a challenge, right? I would have a couple stories for that. Time when you worked hard in a team, a couple stories for that. Time when you had demonstrated leadership, time when you received feedback, all these things you kind of have to assume that they're going to ask you all these different questions. And again, it's another comes down to being over prepared, and kind of just walking into an interview knowing that like literally I did way too much work for this. I probably shouldn't have done, I probably didn't need to, but at least I'm over prepared and I'm ready for whatever they ask me. I think that that's kind of how I approached it. Yeah, happy to get further into that.
Yeah, basically prepare for all the scenarios you can think of, have a couple stories prepared for each, and then know that not all of them are going to come up. But the point is, you can't predict which ones will. And so the ones that do come up, you're going to have an answer prepared for it. And that's basically how you approach it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Great.
think that's kind of something I knew is like, you know, people say like, oh, have stories. And I knew what that meant, right? Obviously, you're not, I'm not, obviously, it's like, you can have a story about a time you face a challenge. I think Wall Street Mastermind did a good job of, you know, like how exactly should I say that in an interview, right? Like, they have a method where they go through a framework of how to make a story into a relatable story for an interview, right? Because those are two different things, right? Telling a good story to someone who's your friend about a time you face a challenge is different from telling a story to an interviewer about a time you face a challenge, especially an investment banking interviewer, right? And so telling a story to a consulting interviewer is going to be different than telling a story to an investment banking interviewer. So like you need to have kind of those frameworks prepared with the investment banking interview in mind and kind of putting a little banking twist on each one of your stories to make them especially relatable to the kind of job you're trying to get. And I think that I had some good help with that, which was great.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think on the behavioral side, you're right. It comes down to a couple things: picking the right stories, which matters a lot. Because a lot of people pick horrible examples, and it's like, well, that's not like, and like sometimes they don't know this horrible example, right?
Yeah.
That's the worst. And then once you have the right examples, then the packaging matters too, right? Like, how do you tell the story, the same story told by two different people? One can sound a lot better than the other,
Yeah.
right? And so some people are good storytellers, some people are
Yeah.
not. Having these frameworks, I think, is helpful because it helps you organize your thoughts and helps you structure the answers in a way that is coherent and is concise and is in a way that kind of bankers like to hear, right? So um, that's kind of like how we like to approach all the behavioral stuff, but
Yeah.
makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So I guess one last question for you, just because we're coming up on time here, but I always like to end with this question, which is, now that you're on the other side and you've gone through this process, you probably know a lot more now than you did 6 months ago, right? And so is there like what's your best piece of advice that you would want to give to someone who maybe is just starting out in the process now, or maybe what would you tell yourself, like the version of you from 6 months ago,
Yeah.
if you were just starting out, like something that really made a big difference for you?
Yeah. I have two. I have two. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. The
So
more the merrier.
yeah, okay. So I think these two things, like, genuinely are by far the most important things for anyone trying to get into banking. Besides, obviously, everyone's gonna, practice their technicals and behaviorals, but like I think that these two things are like super important. So first of all is having like a genuine interest in the industry. And I think if you're somebody who does, or can at least can convince yourself that you do, right? In some cases, you like you will come off so much better in an interview if you can talk about deals that have happened. You can talk about how the landscape is looking. You can talk about specifically, why you genuinely are interested in the job. You know what the job entails. You know what an investment bank is, right? A lot of people don't even know that. You like I just, you're kind of just like, it's a super day, and a lot of these interviews are kind of just conversations at sometimes, like with people who are really, really high up, like a conversation with an MD, a conversation with a VP. And it's like they can tell if you are interested. They can tell if you have been following the recent M&A activity. And this is only something that you really do if you're really interested in it, right? And I think someone who's not interested and someone who's like, oh, I'm just doing this because it looks good on my resume or whatever, that sure, they'll memorize one M&A deal and they'll have that ready and prepped. But somebody who actually knows how the market's changing and the risks and the different factors at play and how this bank is specific and et cetera, et cetera. It's just going to be so obvious in an interview, and it comes from a place of genuine interest, which I think is really apparent.
Yeah.
And the second thing I think is being unique on paper and in real life. I think a lot of people that I've seen have freshman summer finance internship, maybe even a winter break or remote finance internship, sophomore summer finance internship. That's what, and then finance clubs. That's their resume. I think that's great, right? I mean, I'm not saying you're going to get denied by every job. I mean, I'm sure, people like that, do fine. But I think the really like holy grail is having something where people just go, hold on. What did you just say? Can you talk more about that? Right? If you say, oh yeah, I worked at this, middle market investment firm in my hometown doing XYZ, they'll be like, great, next question, right? It's about having like an experience that is just they never see and is like unique. And so that can be like maybe starting your own business, or maybe like, what I did is I literally worked on a farm in Hawaii last summer. So random, super kind of super like just, yeah, random. And something that I genuinely spent so much time talking about in interviews, just because the interviewers were like, wait, tell me about that. What'd you do? Yeah. And they loved it, right? They're like, wow, that sounds so awesome. Like, that's so unique. That's so cool. It would have been way worse if I decided to do a kind of like a standard basic finance internship, I feel like, and then they would have been like, walk me through a deal you did. I would have walked them through a deal. They would have been like, cool, next question, right? And I think that's not to say that you shouldn't have anything finance, right? You should make sure that they know you want to do finance and you have the kind of, experiences to back it up. But once you're past that point of, I want to do finance, I can prove it with my resume, then you kind of got to be unique, and you have to have things that you can talk about that no one else is going to talk about, and talk about it in a smart, cool, unique way that gets people interested. And so, having a genuine interest on the industry where you can talk about stuff and shoot this stuff with an MD, and just, it comes off that you're passionate, and two, being unique, and, wow, this kid's like, I've never seen this kid, a kid who has this background. I've never seen that, that is what will get you an offer, in my opinion. And I think that that's like the two most important things.
And this is also, I mean, both of these things, I think, again, just to reiterate, is also part of the reason why it's so critical to start as early as possible. Because
Yes.
like if you start early, you have time to build up your industry knowledge. You have time to, follow different relevant publications or read up on stuff. Like you can't really fake knowledge or expertise. Like you can't really fake genuine interest, right? Like you're not gonna, a lot of people try to like, read the news the day before the interview
Right,
and then
right,
try to
exactly.
go in and sound intelligent about it. It's like, no, you read one article, you haven't, versus someone who's been reading day in, day out and been connecting the dots. They're just gonna be able to talk about it at a different level than you are. And then like even the point about being having something unique, it's to your point, you need some baseline markers or finance experience on your resume so that when people see your application or see your resume, they can tell that you actually have a genuine interest in finance. But like once you have that, then yes, like you can, think about like what other unique angles you can go out and accumulate. But if you don't even have that in the first place, like a lot of people, they, they start prepping when recruiting is already happening and they don't have any relevant experience on their resume, then all they can do is at that point, like try to figure out like what finance experience can I get as soon as possible. And they're not worried about anything else. Right. And so it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like you start with like the most important, like the
True,
basics
true,
that you gotta
true.
have, and then
Yeah,
like once you have that, then you can go to the next level. It's like, okay, like how do I actually add more stuff on top of that? And
yeah.
people that can do that are the ones that started early, or like people like you who have known that you want to do banking since senior high school or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that advice was not something that I do not take credit for that piece of advice. So that advice of like kind of doing something unique and doing something weird, which is honestly the ultimately the reason that I ended up going to work on that farm, was given to me by someone who's really, really high up at a pretty well-known private equity firm. And so he like told me, like, when I look at candidates, like, this is what I look for. I look for kids who are I look for people who are unique, who all have these kind of weird things that, by the way, going back to behaviorals, when they asked me a time when I faced a challenge, you talk about a time on the farm when you were working in a team, the greenhouse, got destroyed by a storm and you had to fix it. Great story there, right? And so it's these kind of weird, unique experiences that give you the stories that you can talk about in your behaviorals, and that make it so you come off as like a real human being with a good personality and like someone who has dimensions, right? Instead of just like finance, 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 finance. But yeah, you're right. Having a finance base is really, really important. And you know, the earlier you start, the earlier you can get that base, and then the earlier you can do non-finance things that can make you unique and kind of stand out from the pack. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Awesome, man. That's really great advice. So thanks a lot for sharing that. And look, guys, for those of you that are still with us, if you find yourself in a similar boat where that investment banking is what you want to pursue, you understand it's a very structured process, and you want to make sure that you're going through the process the right way, putting your best foot forward, checking all the right boxes in the limited amount of time that you have. Then I want to encourage you guys to reach out to our team, schedule a free strategy session with us, where we'll talk about your situation, talk about where you're currently on the recruiting process, talk about what your goals are, what are the types of banks you want to get into, and what you feel like needs to happen to get from where you are right now to where you're trying to go, right? And depending on what that is, we can also map out, how we think we might be able to help you out. And you can take whatever we talk to you about and, either get our help with it if it's a good fit, or you can also go back and do it on your own as well, right? Either way is fine. But ultimately, regardless of what you do, our goal, our mission here is just to help as many people as possible really get their dream jobs on Wall Street. So if you guys want to do that, you can go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And that's pretty much it. And we look forward to talking to you guys. All right. And with that said, James, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day to talk to us. I know it's final time, final exam time, and you're busy prepping for that. And so, I don't want to take up more of your time. And best of luck with that. And also, enjoy your spring break, man. I mean, you earned it, and it's well deserved time to take a break and party a little bit. So,
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all your help throughout the process. And yeah, for sure. Yeah, take care.
absolutely. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. All right.